This is the goofy, crazy model that came out of it. So to create a culture of shared aspiration where the organization and everybody in it has common meaning and desire to get to an outcome, I have a dream, to ensure that people are aligned around that aspiration, to give people the autonomy to take action and have agency where they know they can contribute based on their perspective, but also at the same time holding them accountable for delivering, because we have to move the whole organization forward. So the goal here is, how do you create a leadership system that drives, that nudges the culture towards aspirational alignment, autonomy, and accountability, which if you get those four, you get agility. Agility ships with the freight. You have to, in leadership system needs to encompass these 10 components. Now, there's a whole book on this thing, but I'll give you a very high level view of what each one of these is and what the key shifts you need to make are. So again, I borrowed very heavily from the Agile Manifesto. So let me give you an example, right? Communicating a compelling change narrative. This is the test. So I give this as a test to, I don't care what level of organization I ask people to take what I call the PCT pulse. Think about this for your organization. Do your leaders communicate a clear, concise, consistent, and compelling narrative that makes a purposeful, passionate, and emotionally resonant case for change? If your leaders aren't doing that at every level, then people don't have the plot. They don't get it, right? So in order for that to happen, the shifts that have to happen within leadership is we have to value the shared aspiration over the required action. If all leaders are ever doing is saying, have you done the shit that I asked you to do yesterday? Where's the growth? I'm not saying that it's not important. Just as with Agile, you've got to deliver on results. However, if you're going to have a leadership system that's going to look to the future and have that long-term vision that Chris was talking about, people need to have a shared aspiration. You need to be looking over the next ridge and see where you're going. Emphasizing the possible future over the problematic present. If all we're going to do is worry about the problematic present, we're going to go in a sinkhole. There's plenty of problems that we have to deal with, but we also need to see the possibility for the future. And then with a nod to Simon Sinek and all the work that Raj Gulati is doing at the moment, is the purposeful why over the actual what and how. Whose job is it to articulate the why and find meaning? So essentially, each one of these has a PCT Pulse question about leadership. And then if you don't do well in each one of these areas, these would be the shifts that you might have to make individually as a team and as an organization in order to create the conditions so that you have aspiration, alignment, autonomy, and accountability. Does this make sense? We okay? Thumbs up from Enrico. So second, our leaders generate respect and followership from others by personally, authentically, and openly modeling the change, beliefs, and behaviors required to evolve the organization. Yesterday, I went into my kid's room and it was a nightmare. He's just back from college. I'm like, kid, clean up your room. I went in there last night. In the chat, was the room cleaned up? I'm seeing no's all the way down the line. If you have kids, you know. And why? Well, I went into my room and guess what? My room looked like a shitstorm. So why on earth would my kid clean up his room if me, in a leadership context, doesn't model that behavior? So if the leaders aren't walking the talk, if they're not demonstrating the change behavior as opposed to just demanding it, if they're not being authentic and open about the fact, I don't know the answer, but some of us can figure it out, if they're not really creating a culture saying, let's try and learn over think and plan. I'm not saying thinking and planning should be thrown out the window, but I'm saying we need to extend by trying and learning. Maybe we need to, launch a whole bunch of these tools inside the organization, create a little bit of internal venture capital, and allow people to test. We did that at IBM. Right? Creating the conditions to allow people to find their way forward in a world that's more complex. Our leaders show vulnerability, seek help, demonstrate that failure is acceptable, and constantly seek to increase the autonomy and accountability of others. How many leaders do we have that show vulnerability over projecting power? No leader today knows what's going on. They can't. It's too complex. None of us is as smart as all of us. How many leaders ask open questions? I don't know, what do you think, over demanding definitive answers? I need to know the results by tomorrow. How many leaders make failure safe over playing it safe so that their retirement plan is okay? Our leaders bring clarity and focus by prioritizing and communicating the key strategic priorities that matter most to the business, right? So how many leaders focus strategic attention instead of measuring project progress? Half the projects in the system aren't going to yield value, and we let them float around inside the system, despite the fact that they're dead on arrival. How many of us have disciplined prioritization over holding multiple options? I'm all about options theory, but not if it goes completely crazy. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, right, he drew a 2x2. He got rid of the Apple Lisa, named after his daughter, and said, we need to have business, enterprise, PC, and laptop. That's it. We need to get back to 4 products. Scully had gone amok because he was an FMCG guy. He just thought the more products, the better. And how often do we prune project portfolios rather than letting them flow? Once a project gets into the system, it's like a cockroach. You can't kill it. It just keeps going through. And that's giving up the opportunity for a new one. And once a project is down inside the guts of a firm, it's not getting any signals from the market as to whether or not that project is useful or not. I worked with a gentleman who was a president of Coca-Cola, and then he went to Revlon, and he literally went into a store, a CVS store here in the United States, and he saw the display for a product that he knew was no longer being manufactured. And he's like, oh my God. And literally, back to your point, Chris, earlier, he did 100 phone calls a day through the telephone, this is pre-internet, to reconnect the factory to the store. The whole system had been broken down, right? Our leaders understand how to motivate discretionary effort by tapping into the aspirations of others and giving them autonomy in return for accountability. How many of us channel the aspiration of the people we're working with to allow them the opportunity to develop? How do we motivate with inspiration over manipulating with fear? How do we recognize novel effort, even if it failed, over requiring conformity? Again, the gray stuff is not saying we shouldn't do it. It's saying, but we need to stretch from that if we want to create an environment that's going to be dynamic, that's going to be, risk-taking, that's going to find the next breakthrough, that's going to take the organization on the next S-curve to move forward. Giving others agency. Our leaders create agency by take independent action and make changes without hierarchical approval. I know that happens in Chris's organization. I'm not sure it happens in my organization. I'm not sure it happened at IBM when I worked there. So leaders have to think about give and take reciprocity over top-down hierarchy, allowing independent action over requiring prior permission. Roger Martin says this better than anyone else. The 2 things that kill innovation, 2 words, prove it. Prove it is prior permission. Bring me the proof, and then I'll give you permission. Well, if you're going to do something breakthrough, how could you prove the iPad is going to be a killer product in the market? Because there is no market for the thing yet, right? So I'm not saying everything needs to be in the 5% bet the farm portfolio, but there should be 5% in the bet for the farm portfolio, and those should be the best possible opportunities. Giving individual agency over exercising authority. So letting people, find their way. And that's how you unlock what we call discretionary effort. Our leaders only help make the choices they're best equipped to make, clarify the choices others have to make, and the boundaries within which to make them. This is Roger Martin's book about choices. He thinks about organizations as choice factories. And it's the speed of choices that actually differentiates firms today. And I agree with that position. So sometimes you have to value experience and expertise over position and role. There's a lot of times where you have expertise inside the organization that is not recognized by a role that you should be listened to. Secondly, if you're a leader and you've defined a strategy, you need to explain the rationale for that strategy over expecting agreement. Just because you are in a position of power, if the people don't understand it or don't understand the rationale, they're not going to follow you. And also, you need to give up power. You need to distribute decision-making over centralizing decisions. The problem with, if you think about organizations as choice factories, is that bottlenecks, as Peter Drucker famously said, tend to be at the top of the bottle. And if you do an organizational network analysis on the decision flow, it always gets stuck at the top. So we have to decentralize decision-making if that's something that we're looking to do, if we're trying to get the organization to move more quickly. Catalyze the network. So we think about organizations not about as hierarchies, but networks. So we have to tap into the informal network of the organization more than we do the organization hierarchy. We have to think about organizational network analysis. Who's the right constellation of people to work on this particular thing? And most importantly, it's not about an assigned cross-functional team. We're going to develop a purpose for the organization. So we're going to have one person from HR, one person from ops, one person from marketing, and they will define it. That never works. Emergent collaborative teaming is where there are people who are passionate about being engaged in this. I'm doing a project with Red Hat right now. And the whole story of how they developed their purpose, they opened it up to the whole organization, 10,000 people. And 20% of those people were fully engaged in this process. And because they had 1 in 5, of people who voted with their feet because they were passionate, what emerged as their purpose statement was the purpose statement of the place. Nobody was against it. Our leaders catalyze collaborative leadership required to successfully navigate dynamic, complex, and systemic change. This is Peter Senge about systemic leadership. You need systemic collective leadership over functional hierarchy. We tend to think of leadership as role and position. It's a noun, not a verb. Leadership is a set of actions and interactions and between people at every level. And there's only one definition in my mind for leadership, and that's that you have a follower. Leadership's job is to engender followership. How do you engender followership? How would you get a person to go over the cliff with you, right? And if you can do that, then you can catalyze and guide change over control and monitor compliance. And then you've built an adaptive leadership system that can bob and weave, that has the sense organs at the edge of the organization to identify whether something's changing over just simple technical leadership practices. And if you can do all of that, and you can keep working that adaptive system, you can consciously and continuously nudge the culture in the direction of aspiration, alignment, autonomy, accountability. But to do that, you really need to put the cart back in front of the horse. You need the horse back in front of the cart. You need to think about the human and emotional change and how people are going to feel about it over the technical and rational change. You can't take culture on directly. You have to activate each of these elements as you move forward in the way that makes sense for you. And you have to, the leadership system needs to work on nudging the culture over leaving culture to chance.